Hi everyone. So I am big on time, so we're going to start on time. This will be recorded, so for anybody that's coming in late, they'll be able to jump on. I want to thank those people that came on and waited with us while we were, working out the kinks. I am Brittany Singh Williams. I am the founder of Spark Education. And I'm also your moderator here today in navigating the ADHD maze. Um, we're so excited to have you because one of the missions of Spark is really to provide resources and support to families across the region when it comes to ADHD, helping our children to thrive as well as parents, because some of us also have ADHD. And so it's important that we all as a family, take on the journey together. And our mission is to create community and share experiences and learn from each other. As we know, anything with, having a neurodiverse child or you yourself being neurodiverse, it can be an extremely lonely journey. And so a big part of this is for us to really start developing community. Today's workshop, Navigating the ADHD Maze, is specifically going to be about how we look at the different aspects of ADHD, whether it is with professional assessments or medication, how to advocate, and what are the different kinds of things you can do, such as coaching, to thrive with ADHD. So we're thrilled to have a panel of experts here today to share knowledge and answer your questions. We will eventually just close off the chat and you can use the Q&A tab specifically because we want to be able to answer your questions so that you feel heard. So whatever questions you have, definitely hit the Q&A tab in order to get that done. Here on the panel, you'll probably see Kayla. Kayla is our host today and moderating. So I think you will still be able to send messages directly to Kayla if you are having a challenge with anything. Right now, you should be seeing just a little check-in poll on the screen. It would be super helpful if you can just, click it and complete it as you wish so that we can get a general idea of how you're feeling. Are you aware that your child has ADHD, or are you just here because you're, interested, or do you feel equipped on this journey? So I want to also encourage you to stay until the end for special announcements that we have. So I'm going to go right into introducing our panel. This evening we have Dr. Jordan Eaton. He is a dynamic psychiatrist with a passion for mental health, and Jordan has completed his medical training at the University of the West Indies here in Jamaica. He has extensive experience in working in psychiatric care, and he's currently serving as the senior registrar at St. Catherine Health Department. He has contributed to numerous research papers and has been recognized for the use of psychedelic mushrooms in treating psychiatric conditions. So thank you, Jordan, for being here. Up next, we have Heidi Fishbein, a sought after ADHD and Christian life coach, and she was actually my mentor as a coach. Heidi's unique approach helps clients tap into their strengths and achieve their life goals. With a focus on building personal confidence and self-worth, Heidi empowers individuals to navigate life's challenges and the daily struggles of ADHD through a holistic and supportive approach. Heidi is also a parent of ADHDers. And finally, we have Christina, an associate clinical psychologist with a master's in clinical psychology from the University of the West Indies, again here in Jamaica. And Christina specializes in ADHD and executive functioning management, providing psychological assessments, therapy, and parent coaching. And she believes in helping individuals identify and maximize their skills to overcome adversity. I forgot to point out that Heidi is actually based in Canada. So again, thank you all of you for being here, and I'm so excited to get started in the discussion this evening. So I'll just jump right into it and put, I guess, Christina, I'll start with you. The beginning of the journey of identifying, does my child have ADHD? And I want you to kind of explain the significance of parents getting the professional intervention and assessments at an early stage, even if they're not really sure, and how getting the early action can influence the long-term outcomes for their children and teenagers.
Okay. Hi everybody. So early intervention is very important, and I'd like to start with a quote that says, "Children do well if they can." So the idea of that is children aren't struggling or not performing to their potential because they want attention or because they're just too lazy. If they're capable, they will do the best that they can within their capacity. And so what we find with children who have ADHD, or not ADHD, but executive functioning challenges, is that teachers and parents will say, I know that he or she can do better. I know that they are not performing to their potential. Or if your child is like how I was, teacher would say, Christina could do so much better if she didn't talk as much or something like that, right? And so if these things are happening, then it comes with a lot of stress for that person and for that child, because everybody is holding them at a particular expectation and they have expectations of themselves. But because of the neurological challenges that they're having, so neurological means it's happening in their brain. It's not that they sat down and said, you know what, I could get 100, but I'm just gonna get half of the questions wrong. They didn't decide that. They aren't able to meet their potential. So early intervention allows for parents to understand their children a lot better, for teachers to understand their students better, and the teachers and parents are able to create interventions that can support the child to maximize on their potential. It's also going to be important for the children to have an understanding of what's going on with them, so that they know that they are not faulty. They are not, they don't need to go back to the factory or something. It's that their brain is dynamic. It's different from the person beside them, depending on the school. And so they need to do different things in order for them to perform in the way that they want to perform. Early intervention decreases the comorbidities of anxiety and depression. Early intervention allows children to get the resources that they need. Something as simple, I would say, as getting extra time to do tests is magnificent when we think about things like PEP and CSEC and CAPE, where their performance in these exams have long or lifelong implications. And so that's where I'd come from in terms of the usefulness of early intervention.
Okay, so you raised that interesting point of the children knowing their diagnosis and what it actually means for them. Oftentimes parents don't necessarily want to tell their children. So especially in the Caribbean, oftentimes they don't want to tell them because they may take on the label and then make excuses. I've heard that one before, like just because I tell them they go have ADHD, they're going to start acting hyper and say, I have ADHD, I can't help it. Like, what is the can we talk a little bit about like why it's important? And I think I'll have you answer, but Heidi, I also want you to jump in here themselves and why it's important.
Well, I have a different approach in terms of I like to respect parents' wishes, and so if they don't want to give a label of ADHD to, like, they don't want to tell the child they have ADHD, I think it's important that they explain to the child how their brain works. And so instead of saying you have a disorder named ADHD, if they're worried about labels, which we have to respect parents, we can't take over the parenting for them. I say it's important. So they have to get educated so that they can educate their child on how the brain works. And then the next part is the parents who are worried about or concerned about, oh, I have ADHD, that's why I didn't do that. I always say your response should be, yes, you know that you have ADHD. So what strategies did you use to help this issue that you know that you have? And so even if there is a crutch, you don't have to play along with the crutch. You and the child has a responsibility with the information that they have to try their best. And so when they try and they say, well, I tried this, and he said, okay, do you think it's working? Okay, let's try. Okay, do we need to add something else, or do we need to do something completely different? We don't just stay at, oh, you please forgive me because I have ADHD. You know, that's my approach.
Okay. Heidi, you can jump in.
Oh, I, Christina, I love hearing you speak about this. And of course, as a coach, the thing that stands out the most is helping our kids understand who they are. Like I like how you said, send them back to they don't need to go back to the factory, right? They're not broken. There's nothing that needs to be fixed. And their brain is beautiful. And I think it's an asset that your brain works different. My little guy is 10 and he has a lot of different struggles. And what's so cool is just being able to point out those moments where he sees the world different. And I'm like, that's it right there, right? That's the thing. That is a gift. That is so special. But it can sometimes not feel so special when we're living in chaos. We're living in confusion. We're living in, I'm getting trouble at school. At my son's school, they have something called a red card. Very traumatizing, this red card, right? But when he gets this red card, it's huge. But to your point, Christina, to know how our brain works, right? And I think as a parent, I wasn't comfortable telling my kiddos what their diagnosis was until I was comfortable in it, right? Until me as a parent knew, okay, what is ADHD? How is it different? How do our brains work? So that when I say, hey, my 10-year-old, it's adorable when he says, I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when you hear that word disorder, right, we want to make sure that we're able to say, here's what the diagnosis is, and here's how your brain works, right? And taking the time to help our kids learn how their brain works, because there are some common experiences, but then we also know there's a lot of difference as well. This is something I could just totally go on. There's one thing I do want to add just about the early intervention piece that Christina was talking about. You had mentioned that it lowers some of the co-occurring conditions that we see, especially for kiddos with hyperactivity. We see that can go inward as anxiety in its presentation. And when you have the opportunity to learn about yourself, I think at an early age, it helps to change that inner voice that we all have, right? Of, oh, I'm stupid. I can't do that, right? Because before we know it, our kiddos are looking around at other friends and saying, hey, they can do this, but I have so much trouble doing that. I remember the day my 10-year-old, he was probably 8 at the time, he was crying, and we usually have some snuggle time at nighttime. And he said to me, Mom, when I look around, I see that my friends are all free. They're free. They can just do the things that they want to do. And then I feel so trapped. An 8-year-old, right? So to have these conversations earlier, as hard as they are, it's better in the long run, right? Because my son, I'm blessed that he's able to articulate that and share that so we can work through that. And yet some kiddos will just keep that in.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a big one. So like how we communicate with our children, whether if we know they have ADHD or not from the very early stages, it's so important to keep, talking about those emotions and feelings about how they feel because, even that awareness happens much younger than we think. So you got to hear from him at 8 years old, but there are kids who 4 are like, I think I'm different from everyone else, So it's really important to pay attention to those cues. And as we talk about how the brain works, I'm gonna invite Jordan to jump in here. If you could share, Jordan, or explain a little bit about how the ADHD brain actually works and like what the potential long-term effects of untreated ADHD can look like leading into adult life.
All right, so I can preface this conversation by saying, hi, I'm Dr. Eaton. At 33, I got my adult diagnosis of ADHD. We did not know what was going on, and during primary school, everything was fine because engagement. High school, thrilling. I was convinced I was an idiot, but we press on. The question at hand is, what causes ADHD? The answer is We are not 100% sure. We know it is an impulse dysregulation disorder, meaning there's a part of your brain that produces a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine makes you feel good. So whenever you have your favorite meal, you watch a good movie, you have a good laugh, that's dopamine. Same thing you get from exercising and all of those things, right? In the brain of a patient like myself with ADHD, there is a dopamine imbalance, meaning the reward that your brain is going to give you for completing a task or initiating a task or doing any of these executive functions, it basically doesn't exist. So there is no primal drive or reward from doing this. It just feels completely indifferent. That is the main theory that we are working with right now. So it is an imbalance of the chemicals in the brain that causes dysregulation, and it affects our drive and our attention and our concentration and our impulses to actually be attentive, or in some instances to slow down. Because what we have to remember is that while we talk about ADHD as an entity, ADHD technically has 3 subtypes. So you have the inattentive type, where you are forgetful, you are daydreaming, you are spacing out, you can't wait your turn. You also have the hyperactive type, which is you are powered by a motor, you are jumping around the place, you are running up and down, you are climbing on things. And then the third type is a combination of the 2. So here's where things get interesting. For children and adolescents, the usual presentation is predominantly the hyperactive type. So you'll see these kids just running around having a great time, but they're not a problem. When you put them in a structured environment, i.e. school or class or very regimented activities, what's happening is their brain is rebelling. And the best way I can describe ADHD to people is, whereas most people will think A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, and I can clearly think that through, in my brain, it's like there's 6 different voices of me pulling my brain in 6 different directions, and I'm having 6 separate thoughts simultaneously. So that explains why we cannot focus on things, as well as we cannot keep still. If we are not actively engaged, we are going to try and get everything done as quick as possible so we can find something to almost like stimulate ourselves. And then what happens is when you reach adulthood, as Christina was talking about, because we don't recognize it, you usually get anxiety or depression as psychiatric conditions, meaning you are putting off all these deadlines, all these things that you have to, that you know you can do, but your brain just refuses to start. So you're doing it at the last minute and you are an anxious wreck. Cut to me doing my research project to complete my residency. That was fun. The other is you will initiate it and you will get it done, but by the time you're supposed to wrap up fine details, you can't bother, or you're just rushing to get through it so fast, you're making simple mistakes. And when the paper comes back, or the activity comes back, or the feedback comes back, both as a child and as an adult, you will get like 50 or 60%. And that's a pass. But then part of your brain is like, but we could have done better. Why can't we just do better? So it's either you're going to get the anxiety from not being able to initiate, or the depression that usually comes from not being able to achieve your potential. And as you go into adulthood, it causes dysregulation. So not being able to healthily gauge, like, for example, rejection. You get something called rejection hypersensitivity. Someone say, you ask someone for a favor and they say, hey, no, sorry, I can't do it. I'm in the middle of something. That rejection completely destroys you for the day, right? It also has implications on how it is that you can function day to day at work, right? Because if it is that you're always inattentive and making careless mistakes, your bosses are going to ask what's going on. And then if you're rushing through and getting things done ahead of time to get it done and dusted, but you're still making careless mistakes, you're going to be in problems, right?
Wow.
It's important because, and here's the thing, the reason we're having this conversation is because we are more aware of ADHD. We are talking about it more. We are recognizing our signs and symptoms in our kids, in our nieces or nephews or students, whoever it is. And we're saying, hey, we don't need to necessarily label this as a bad thing. Your brain just works a little different, and that's fine. We're just going to rein you in a little bit and give you a little bit more oomph. The problem is that when we miss this diagnosis in childhood, children with ADHD do not outgrow it. They become adults with ADHD who, when they're non-functional, they just spiral. So let's have these conversations.
Wow, that was like Jordan, that was a lot.
That's
A
why we
lot.
recorded it.
I don't know if any other speakers want to jump in. I have a lot to say, but I feel like they're probably bubbling too. Heidi, you look like you're ready to speak.
Yeah, well, Jordan, you're so engaging, just so that you
Yeah.
know, just to
Because ADHD.
Yes, I love it. The energy, bring it. And absolutely, like I couldn't agree more. And I really enjoyed your analogy and explaining your experience with all the different voices telling you to do different things about the same thing simultaneously, right? We hear so many experiences of, having your, too many tabs open on your computer. I remember when I didn't know I had ADHD, I remember I worked in a gym and one of the guys said to me at one point, he was like, it's almost like you have a circus just playing all the time in your head. And now when I look back, I'm like, that's kind of like there's music. And he's like, I just imagine and all these things happening. And I'm like, yep. That's very accurate.
And here's the thing, it can work out to your benefit because people look at me and they're like, how do you come up with these ideas? And I'm like, guys, I don't know. I can't answer that question. Please don't ask me to repeat it because it was a stream of consciousness. One of the voices told me, I followed it. Work it out on your own. It
right?
works.
It's like, I can't
work.
repeat it. It happened and, catch it as you can. Yeah. And I think you said it so beautifully, Jordan. And the thing that stood out to me that is a common misunderstanding is the hyperactivity, right? I work with a lot of folks who are like, well, I was diagnosed with ADHD, but I don't have the H, right?
Yeah.
Because we think of that H as that, I have the stereotypical little boy running around, jumping off of things, but that's typically how we have kind of been, I want to say conditioned, or how we believe that hyperactivity to be. But what is so fascinating is we might have a daughter or a son who isn't running around climbing and jumping, but they're verbally, that was me.
That was me.
Scorecard, right? Heidi can't stop talking to everyone. I'm like, put me in the front, I'll talk to the teacher. But that verbal hyperactivity, or something that's a little less likely to see, the internal, right? The ruminating, the
hyperfixation almost.
Absolutely, right? And I also see that playing out every scenario, just running it through and this and this, and if this happens, we'll do this and this and that. And it just becomes this whole thing where you're in your own world. Outwardly, we might not even notice, but the internal experience that someone with ADHD is having, I think of that ADHD iceberg, right? I think we all know of that iceberg, what we see, what people think is ADHD. And then it's like, look at what is under here. Right? Like I actually, for a gift for everybody who's listening, I created a workbook for kiddos with ADHD. And I created a little iceberg with a little penguin on it fishing. And I put just all of those experience that kids might experience in their language as well. Right? When we think about kids that might not be able to put words to what they're experiencing.
And to finish that point, Heidi, I want to go back to something that you and Christina were talking about. And I absolutely 110% understand the urge for parents to not want to label this a disorder, right? You don't want to say, oh, my kid has this condition, right? I respect that. I may disagree with it, but I will respect it. Your child, you parent how you want. What I can say is that there are age-appropriate ways of communicating this. We don't have to call it ADHD. Hey, Jordan, we've noticed some things. Your brain is going in 6 different directions at once. And that's cool, my guy. That's just how you are. But we're just gonna shift it back a little bit because you notice where you get flustered sometimes and you notice how you don't finish your things and you feel a little out of sorts. Yeah, it's because your brain is going with the whole circus at the same time while you're running a 3-ring circus in the we're just gonna and you'll respond to it quite well, and you get positive results in terms of symptomatology.
Yeah. Sorry, Brittany, child appropriate language.
Correct.
Right. I think of Ned Hallowell. This is how I explained it to my son. And he explains it to his friends this way as well. He's proud. He tells everyone. But the way he remembers it is I have a race car brain, right? Like my brain is like a Ferrari and you have bicycle brakes. But that's okay, right? Because we have brake specialists that are going to help you learn how and when to navigate that brain and when to start braking and when to and that has resonated with him since he was probably 6, 7. We love cars. My husband and my boys, they all love cars. So it made sense. But you're right, Jordan. We don't have to say, hey, you have a disorder, right? Or deficit. We can say it in age appropriate language that they're like, yeah, right? I do experience that. Yeah, cool.
Christina, you wanted to jump in or should I keep going?
I wanted to jump in on several different points, but then we got here, and so I told my brain to kind of roll back a little bit. So I don't know.
Well, I can just go into a question for you then, because, we're talking about the fact that it's so important to know you have ADHD and communicating that to a person, and it helps you to understand who you are. And that's once you have an understanding of who you are, like, I feel like that is a starting point for being able to thrive with ADHD, right? But in the Caribbean, and I think even across the world, Heidi can, confirm, but it's so hard to sometimes get these appointments, get diagnosed, and, it is a journey, and even it is cost prohibitive in many cases as well. So if a parent suspects, my child has ADHD, but I can't afford the assessment, or the one that I can afford, I can't get this assessment for the next 2 or 3 years, because sometimes that's how long the wait list is. How do you, what would you recommend a family do, even without the formal diagnosis?
Okay, I think that's such a good question. Okay, so I always go back to right now, my favorite generation is the Gen Z generation, because they have all this information at their fingertips. And a lot of the times when these adolescents and school age children are being diagnosed with ADHD, it's because they've been on TikTok and they're seeing all these things, and then they go to their parents and they're like, I have this, or they go to their psychologist.
I have a few high schoolers doing that now.
And I'm always so impressed, because wow, they're just like, I need therapy, I need this, and they have their faults, but I like that part about their generation. And so I think that the first important thing to do is, while you wait, is to educate yourself. And there is so much information out there. So many parents have come to me and they're like, well, I was reading this, I watched this video, here's a book recommendation. And I was like, I already have this book. And they say, you have this book? And I say, I don't. And they are reading, they're watching videos, they are asking their children, sometimes children as young as 8, and teenagers and adults, they come and they say they were on Google WebMD or wherever they find it on Google, and they have these lists. This is what happened, this is what I'm experiencing, and they describe it for me. And you sit with your child and you ask them, oh, does this ever happen? What do you think? And they're reading and they're watching the videos. So you can never go wrong with just gathering information for yourself. While the assessment is very important for helping you to get resources, helping you to support the child in the education system and get more support in the home, you getting education, getting information, you can start putting in strategies and working with your child from so early. And then I think that, well, usually when people call me and ask me questions, if I have the time, I'm usually giving them answers and stuff. But you can get an ADHD coach. There's Spark, there's me. There are other psychologists that are trained in ADHD. And so even if you do the assessment and the assessment says, well, it's not ADHD, it doesn't mean that your child isn't having executive functioning challenges. And so when I say executive functioning, when I was training in ADHD training, this is like, let's pretend this is your brain, right? And so your brain, this is the brain stem, and this part is the front of the brain. And you know, when they say the brain not fully developed until you're 25, no, they say 28, 30, whatever, right? What happens is that when you think of a baby, all the emotions or most of the emotion part of the brain is down here. You think of the baby, it cries, it gets angry, it's happy, and then we go through and we get language that we can associate with the emotions. And then the front part of the brain now is where the planning and the organizing happens and the regulating happens. And this is the last part of the brain to truly develop. So the brain develops from back to front, right? And so when we think about ADHD, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. Neuro means brain, so it's a disorder in the brain. Developmental means that when we compare this person to other people their age, they are a little delayed. And so neurodevelopmental means that the things that we're seeing in the brain are a little bit delayed for this person's age. And so I lost my thought, but I got it back. Okay. And so that happens to me all the time. Okay. And so they have a neural, and so when we have executive functioning challenges, we're going to see that this child is very forgetful, or they zone out, or we've been talking about anxiety and depression for the past half an hour, but your child has a higher propensity to anger or sadness or just or happiness. It's like bigger. They feel emotions bigger or deeper than the average child, right? And and their attention and focus, when you're saying, wow, you're 10 and you can't sit down and wait 30 minutes, 1 hour, what's really, and you're doing this comparison and you're getting frustrated and you're like, okay, so then you can go online and find strategies that you can test out. And I like to call them experiments. And you're doing experiments with your child and you say, there are no injections, there are no probing. We're just using different strategies to help with these different issues. And we're working them out and testing them out so that we can help you with the challenges that you're having. And so that's where my head goes when we say, well, getting support or getting assessed can be difficult, can be costly, can be timely. The internet is at your fingertips. Google it, YouTube it, it's on TikTok, it's on Instagram. I don't have Instagram and Twitter, but I hear that it's on there. And so you can
there.
breathe there. And so it's there. And so and ask your child, and if you find videos, sit and watch the videos with your child. There are books there for children who have ADHD to understand their brain and how it works. Yeah.
You raised a good point, because a lot of persons may not, well, I have quite a few questions in the Q&A, which I'm gonna jump to, but I want to just touch on what you just said. You may not be diagnosed with ADHD, but you may have an executive function challenge. And a lot of persons don't know what that means. So thank you for explaining that. So it may mean that your child has an issue with emotional regulation or task initiation because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. And so it may be that you still need to apply some principles. So in the Q&A, there are quite a few parents like, so what do you do when your child is not emotionally regulating? Or how do you compensate for it? So I'm gonna throw that out to you guys. But one of the other questions also is, no, I'm diagnosed, or the child gets diagnosed, I have the piece of paper, I know this, and I've probably gone and told the school. What do I do as a parent? So I am going to throw that to Heidi, and then you guys take it from there on, what are the strategies that you would put in place for the different things that you see in with an ADHD person. So Heidi, Jordan, Christina, there.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just bursting at the seams. There's just such a great informative conversation, and even just kind of playing off, and I think this ties into those questions as well, Brittany. I missed the first one, but I got the second one. What do we do even when we might have the diagnosis in hand? What do we do? What do we do if we don't, have the diagnosis and we're waiting, or it's not accessible, or it costs too much money, however that works? What your kids need at school and home, above all, is kindness, is grace, is forgiveness, is acceptance, is someone to understand them and to hold space with them. That is what you do in between different treatment. And even when you have treatment, above all, right? Your kiddo, in most cases, just wants to be understood and to be heard. I work with some kiddos that have different learning challenges in a school system here. And this little girl that I work with, she told me, she said, Heidi, you're the best teacher I've ever had. I didn't have the heart to tell her I wasn't a teacher, but besides the point, she said, you are the best teacher I've ever had because you let me share my ideas and you let me try to do the work in my way, right? And this little girl loves working with me because I'm like, yeah, like, what do you think? Right? Like, how might we do it? Right? Just holding space for our kids to process. And I think those big emotions, those are hard to go through. And as a parent, especially with ADHD, we can tend to match that. Right? Me and my little guy, we are like little firecrackers together. Right? But when I match his energy, it gets us nowhere. But when I can intentionally calm and bring this is a huge strategy, just something we could start doing right away. Take a
This is
few
a big
deep
one.
breaths.
The parents regulating themselves. Go into that one, Heidi.
Regulate yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Because as soon as we escalate and we're maybe having some sensory challenges, getting overstimulated ourselves, getting frustrated, right? Then it adds oil to the water, fire to the oil, so whatever that saying is. But it's how we show up. Unfortunately, I remember when my 10-year-old, he is very hyperactive. And when he was younger, it was a struggle. It was really hard. And when we started reaching out for treatment, they sent me to a cognitive behavioral therapist. And I'm like, but wait, he's the one that's running around and why am I going? And I realized, and I was like, it kind of starts with me, right? It starts with the adult, the parent, me getting educated, me understanding, I get my brain and his brain as well. So above all, a lot of it is parent training, is understanding yourself first. I kind of think of when we're on the airplane, we put our mask on before someone else's. And in this case, we have to start doing our own self-care, start taking care of us. And that will pour over into our little people, whether they're in school, they're at home. I get a little passionate about that. I will pass the mic. Jordan.
No probs. Thank you. So I 110% echo that, because especially in Jamaica, parents as a people, we have problems with emotional regulation. There is a significant inability for us to be able to identify what it is that we are actually feeling and understand cognitively where it's coming from. And because that process is so frustrating and mentally exhausting, we just shut down. And instead of processing our feelings, we just act out, right? So it spans the spectrum. And unfortunately, until we start to change ourselves, we can't expect anybody else to change. Because, I mean, you guys see that I speak about my diagnosis quite openly. I am at work. I supervise 3 to 4 different members of staff on a daily basis. And I tell them, I'm like, guys, I've taken my medication. I have taken my caffeine. I am here. But we need to be on time. I need to be out of here by 12. So when y'all hear me waxing and waning philosophical, I need y'all to just grab me and bring me back. If it is that I respond to you in a way that you don't appreciate, you let me know, because I probably have not even registered that that is what has happened, right? There's a very interesting question that I'm seeing here in the chat that is ADHD hereditary? My 6-year-old was recently diagnosed with ADHD. Does that mean his daddy or me has it? It is quite possible. And this is why it is so difficult, because especially in Jamaica, we just typify children as broke bad, nano behavior. Them can't listen. My mother used to call tick broke na ears. And when I got my ADHD diagnosis, I remember high school, my mother with my bio teacher, and she looked at me and she said, Jordan is brilliant. I have no problems with Jordan. Jordan just needs to slow down because Jordan is moving like there's a devil with a pitchfork under him, and I don't understand why. Should have been a clue, but we press on. We need to recognize that a lot of us have undiagnosed ADHD. And as a result of that, we are going to see symptoms in our kids, and it's going to make us go, It gives us an opportunity to learn about ourselves, and it allows us to be empowered to help our kids, right? Because I'm going to keep it buck. I am a psychiatrist. I throw medication at the problem until it goes away. What Christina does, what Brittany, what Heidi do, no, I don't do that. I do medication. The problem is, having taken the medication, it's not all that glitters and gold. Especially for adolescents, I don't believe in using medication unless it is causing significant dysfunction. Psychotherapeutic intervention, coaching interventions, family interventions, when you are consistent with it, you can learn task sharing, task shifting, emotional regulation. You can train your brain to have some level of executive function. So for example, I have, as a part of my ADHD, dyslexia, very mild, and dyscalculia. So for me, it's 6s and 8s, Bs and Ds. Don't know why. And then my digit span is reduced. So when I'm reciting 7 digits at a time, I have learned that's not for me. When I am writing 7-digit numbers that someone is reading to me, I return the paper to them and say, please verify. This is my compensatory mechanism, because my brain will just magically switch numbers or letters and things do not work out, right? And for the adults who think that you may have ADHD, that is okay. Medication options exist. And I read somewhere where someone said they don't think that medication can help them because you're too far gone. I challenge you, because one of the patients that I have in my office right now is a lady who is in her 60s. Her mother is in her 90s and her son is in his 20s. The son was my patient initially and referred his mom to me because his mom had depression and was not getting any resolution with the depression. And she said that he was talking to her about ADHD and she thought it sounded familiar. So I screened her and assessed her. And this lady had been having ADHD symptoms for 40 years. We sat down, we went through medication options, we put options on the table, benefits and risks, cost factoring and everything. And she eventually chose to start the medication. And when she came for her 4-week or 3-week review, she was literally almost in tears because she was like, I feel amazing. This is the best I have ever functioned. Like, my brain is functioning. It's not 100%. But we discussed that you don't want me at 100% because that's not normal, even for people who don't have ADHD. I am hitting around 80%. I am still forgetful at times, but majority of the stuff is getting done. My mood is better. I'm not as anxious. I'm tackling all these major tasks that I have been putting off for so long. I cannot thank you enough. And it happens.